I'm Myra McIlvain, and I'm delighted to be here to read from my book, Steinhouse. It's historical fiction set in the old seaport of Indianola down on the Texas coast. And the book is set between 1853 and 1886, when a hurricane swept through and completely destroyed the town. And it's a ghost town now. But I lived on the coast for 10 years in the 1970s, and I became so involved with that area's history that it stayed with me all these years, and I decided to finally write about the town. And the key push for the book was an interview that I did with a 94-year-old woman in 1974. I wanted to find out about her ancestors who had come into Indianola. And she told me all kinds of stories, like how they traveled the Chisholm Trail, and I used that information in my previous book, Legacy. But then just as I was leaving, just as an aside, she said, you know, there was a woman who came into Indianola with her 4 children on a ship from Germany. And they were struggling because they had watched her husband, Max, she didn't say the name, I made that name up, her husband and their father, drunk and leaping back and forth from the ship to the dock. And as the ship pulled away, he leaped again and fell in the water and drowned. That captured my imagination. And all these years that I've been doing lectures on Texas history, that has stayed with me. And so I finally decided I would name that woman Helga Heinrich, and this is her story. And I will start by reading it. I'm going to read the first few pages and then some more toward later in the book. Helga gripped the ship railing, straining to see the slowly materializing shore, lulled by the sweet sounds of Paul's harmonica as he roamed among the passengers. His music had become part of the voyage, always in the background, adding energy when the hours dragged, lifting spirits during the after-supper sing-alongs. Now the passengers leaned over the ship rail, chattering excitedly, as unaware of Paul's music as they were of the gentle breeze blowing against their faces. Heaving its way through the waves, the ship seemed as eager as everyone on board to reach Indianola, the tiny speck of buildings stretching across the flat Texas landscape. Then, like a storm rising black and angry out of the sea, the memory washed over Helga, forcing her back to the horror that had begun their trip. Max leaped wildly over the ship rail to the dock. The crowd on board roared its delight, enjoying another of his hilarious antics. He whirled to face his audience on deck, tilted the rounded brim of his hat over one eye, spread his feet apart like the maestro of a grand orchestra, and played a few bars of Die Hotli on his harmonica, while the passengers clapped or rapped the rhythm on the ship rail. Then his long, slender, graceful legs sprang gleefully into the air, and he clicked his heels together in a final salute and raced into the inn. The children's hysterical laughter stopped the instant Max disappeared. A cold wind of fear blew over them. Helga caught her breath and pulled the children tight against her, apprehension forcing bile into her mouth. Gretchen whispered, "No, Papa," as she clutched little Anna and buried her face in the 2-year-old's shoulder. Paul trembled like a leaf, and Hermes stood as rigid as a poker, his face still flushed from howling at his father's performance. The sailors ignored it all, kept to their steady pace, never looking up from their work of hauling in the gangplank. The ropes slid like gigantic reptiles across the deck. The sails billowed, and the vessel heaved as it inched ever so slowly from the dock. Max reappeared in the doorway of the inn, and the crowd on deck shouted in delight as he stopped, bowed to his audience, and took a huge gulp from the open bottle. Gretchen shuddered against Helga's shoulder, and Hermes' fist pounded the rail as he muttered between clenched teeth, "Come on, Papa." "It's all right. The captain will wait. Paul breathed into his cupped hands. The ship began its laboring surge as the black swirling water of the Weser River churned up waves that grew from undulating ripples to frothy caps. Still, Mac swirled and danced and tipped his bottle as he headed almost casually toward the departing ship. The laughter died, and in a body the crowd began coaxing him to jump, to make one mad leap, to entertain them one more time. Helga pulled the children tighter against her, holding them, willing them not to watch. And then Max jumped, tossing the empty bottle into the water as his body floated, suspended, arms extended, fingers spread, wildly grasping for the slowly arching rail. His face suddenly twisted to disbelieving shock as his fingers missed their grip and he dropped like a slender arrow straight down into the roiling, icy water without causing the slightest splash. Now, the reason they were going to Indianola was because Helga's younger sister, Amelia, had come to Indianola 7 years earlier and met a German doctor who had come in with that first wave of Germans that settled old Indianola. And they married and became extremely prosperous. And Amelia continued to write to Helga and to Max, begging them to come to Texas. And finally they were offered Max the opportunity to manage Dr. Stein, Amelia's husband, mercantile business. And Helga was given the opportunity to run Dr. Stein's boarding house, which was named Stein House. And so that was the reason they came. Amelia met them at the dock. She walked them through the town, through the clutter, through all the freight traffic, the cowboys in the town, the Mexican carts taking the silver from Mexico out to the port, all of the activity going on, and they were headed then out to their house, to the Stein house. They had not gotten out there yet. And by the way, it sat on the road leading to the interior of Texas. It set back from the bay far enough that the main road that went into the interior passed right in front of Stein House. So they were on their way, and this is what happened. A crowd had gathered in front of an impressive white two-story building. A sign over the door read, Casimir House. Amelia whispered, "Let's cross to the other side. It's a slave auction." Helga's breath caught, and she stood transfixed, staring at a black boy, not more than 10, chained by his ankle and wrist to a giant black man. Both slaves had been oiled until their flesh shined like polished ebony, outlining every detail of their muscles. "They look so strong." Hermie spoke barely above a whisper. "Have you ever seen such muscles on a boy?" Helga had not. The child's massive shoulders bulged under the faded sleeveless shirt, his powerful arms hanging loosely at his sides, seemingly waiting for the next command. She looked down at the rounded softness of Hermie and Paul. How could she think their life was hard? Yet in this new land, she intended to see that their lives improve. Suddenly, the crowd parted, and Helga recognized the top of Anna's blonde head as the child stepped onto the porch and very lightly stroked the black, manacled hand of the boy. The contact made the boy jump, the only indication of his fright. The crowd burst into merry laughter as Anna examined her fingertip for color. Helga pushed her way into the throng and took Anna firmly by the hand. "Please forgive her," she whispered, her eyes riveted to the black child's steady gaze. The amused spectators patted Anna's head and made comments about the lovely little German lass until the auctioneer began chanting excitedly. Almost immediately, the bidding reached a fever pitch. Gretchen said, "Is that man selling those people?" "It's legal." A few locals use slaves as domestics. Mostly they're sold to planters who take them upriver. Amelia kept her voice low. Helga couldn't speak. She clutched Anna's hand and stared at the boy, who continued to look into her stricken face, his eyes bold and defiant. So little remaining of the child within that fully developed body. "We must go. You don't want to see them taken away." Amelia tugged at Helga's arm. "I've got to see where he goes," Helga whispered. A planter stepped forward wearing a big broad-brimmed hat and a green satin vest that made his stomach bulge like he was about to strut at the head of a parade. He paid an amazing $900 for the boy and $1,200 for the man. The auctioneer nodded dismissively as the slaves who trotted The auctioneer nodded dismissively at the slaves who trotted behind the planter in a rhythm that kept them from entangling their jangling chains. With one smooth motion, both black bodies heaved themselves into the back of a wagon. It creaked slowly away, the older slave glaring sullenly into upturned faces, the boy continuing to stare over the crowd at Helga. Amelia pulled at Helga's arm. "Come, you can make yourself sick over something you can't change." Anna tucked her finger protectively into the fold of her skirt. Now I'll read just one more short piece. This is taken from the point of view of Hermie. I've done this several times in the book. I had the children's point of view presented to give a more rounded view of of Helga and of the situation in which they lived. And this is from the point of view of Hermie, who is the oldest. He was 14 when they arrived. And they have settled, it's the first night, they're in the house. And Hermie heard Mama calling from the back porch. She had lit a candle in the kitchen, intending for their lessons to continue without interruption. If success was possible in this new land, his Mama meant for them to have it. While they took turns reading from the Bible, Mama used Anna's wool dress for a pattern to cut out Tante Amelia's soft cotton material. She demanded expression when they read, and she corrected them without lifting her head when they mispronounced one of the names in the Old Testament. Even on board ship, she had insisted every student read with expression. Hermie didn't plan for Mama to ever know her classes on the ship had filled up because of his lie. When one of the boys asked Hermie in front of everyone why his Mama made them read and do numbers every day, the lie that Helga was a teacher came out so easily. It was partially true, for as long as he could remember, she had taught them what Grossmutter and Grossvater Anton taught her: to read Holy Scripture, to spell, and to do numbers, so they knew how much was due on a bill. When Tante Amelia began planning to come to Texas, she and Mama added English to their lessons. At first, Hermie lived in dread of the passengers finding out Mama wasn't a real teacher. She had never been to a real school. As the children began reading and drawing numbers and letters and speaking in English, Mama gained the respect of all on board. It seemed like no one remembered Papa's humiliation. Hermie had mixed feelings about the gifts Mama received from teaching. He was pleased to get Herr Helfen's shoes. His toes rubbed the ends of his old pair, and he still pored over the copy of the Leipziger with its articles on the London Fair, the California Gold Rush, and the German migration to America. But sometimes it felt dishonest to take gifts when she wasn't a real teacher. After their lessons ended, Hermie and Paul strung mosquito net over the corn shuck mattress on the porch the way Tante Amelia showed them. She insisted her corn shuck mattresses were cooler and did not get moldy or stinky like their feather mattresses did on the ship. Lying on the porch, Hermie watched the faint glow of Mama's candle from the doorway of the kitchen. He imagined her long, slender fingers moving rapidly as she drove the needle through the cloth. He wondered if she cried, if she missed Papa. As crickets began a wild chorus, Hermie thought of all the nights Papa stretched out with them in the garden. While crickets rubbed their wings together to call their mates, they gazed with Papa at the stars and imagined flying through the heavens using starlight as their guide. Mosquitoes buzzed incessantly outside the net. A freight wagon rolled past, and a drunk sang a mournful song as he staggered home. Hermie rolled over, covering his ears with both hands. He did not ever again have to listen to Papa come down the lane singing, letting all the neighbors know he had earned enough money to go to the village tavern. The image came again, the ship pulling steadily away from the dock, the water swirling black and angry where Papa had disappeared. When Hermie could hold his breath no longer, he had known it was over. Papa was gone, and he felt profound relief. Thank you.